first thing that hit me wasn't the smell of disinfectant or the sterile white walls of the fertility clinic. It was the sound of my wife laughing, that throaty, intimate laugh she used to save just for me. I'd heard it echoing down the hallway as I approached Dr. Henley's office, and something sent a chill through me. I'm Marcus Kellerman, 34, a marine biology researcher at the Scripps Institution. I spend my days analyzing water samples and tracking migration patterns of deep-sea creatures. My work requires precision, patience, and an eye for patterns others might miss, skills that would serve me well in the coming weeks. The appointment was supposed to be routine. After 18 months of trying, Natasha and I were exploring our options. She'd been distant lately, distracted, always on her phone, citing work stress from her job as a court stenographer. I thought the fertility consultation might bring us closer together. Instead, it was about to blow my world apart. I pushed open the door to find Dr. Henley behind his desk, Natasha in the chair across from him. But it wasn't just the two of them. A third figure sat in the corner, tall, lean, with prematurely gray hair and expensive clothes that screamed success. I recognized him immediately. Devin Torino, Natasha's ex-husband. Marcus! Natasha jumped up, her face flushed. You're early. Traffic was lighter than expected, I said, my eyes moving between the three of them. What's going on here? Devin stood, extending his hand with that politician smile I'd always despised. Marcus. Good to see you again. I didn't take his hand. What are you doing here, Devin? Dr. Henley cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should reschedule. No, I said firmly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me. I think I deserve to know why my wife's ex-husband is sitting in on our fertility consultation. The silence stretched like a loaded spring. Natasha's eyes darted between Devin and me, her hands trembling slightly, a tell I'd learned to recognize over our 3 years of marriage. Sit down, Marcus, she said finally. There's something I need to tell you. Those words. In my line of work, I'd learned that the most devastating revelations often come disguised as simple statements. This was one of them. I remained standing. I'm listening. Natasha took a shaky breath. Devin and his wife, they've been trying to have a baby for years. She can't carry to term. My stomach began to sink, but I kept my expression neutral. And I offered to help them. Her voice was barely above a whisper. As a surrogate. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my knees buckle slightly, and I had to grip the back of the empty chair to steady myself. You what? I managed. Devin stepped forward, his voice smooth and calculated. Marcus, I know this is a shock, but don't... I held up a hand, my eyes never leaving Natasha's face. Don't you dare speak to me right now. Natasha was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. I was going to tell you. When? The word came out like a bang. When exactly were you planning to tell me that you're carrying another man's baby? It's not like that, she protested. It's just helping. Are you pregnant right now? I cut her off. The question hung in the air like a blade. Dr. Henley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Devin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Natasha looked away. That's when I knew, not just that she was pregnant, but that this went deeper than simple surrogacy. The way she avoided my eyes, the way Devin stood protectively near her chair, the way Dr. Henley couldn't meet my gaze. This wasn't a medical arrangement between strangers. This was betrayal in its purest form. How far along? My voice was deadly calm now, the way it got when I was collecting data on a particularly complex research problem. Marcus, please, how far along? 12 weeks, she whispered. I did the math instantly. 12 weeks ago, I'd been in Monterey Bay for a month-long research expedition. Natasha had said she couldn't come because of work. She'd called me every night, told me she missed me, said she loved me. She'd been conceiving another man's child. Whose idea was this? I asked. Devin opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a look that could have frozen seawater. I asked my wife. Natasha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Mine, she said. It was my idea. Another lie. I could tell by the way her left eye twitched. The same tell that gave her away when she bluffed at poker. I turned to Dr. Henley. Is there a contract? He nodded reluctantly and slid a thick document across the desk. I picked it up, my researcher's mind automatically scanning for key details. Compensation, $150,000. Medical expenses covered. exclusive rights to the child granted to Devin and his wife, Rebecca. But it was the date that made my blood freeze. The contract was signed 4 months ago, a full month before Natasha and I had even started trying to have our own baby. "You've been planning this for 4 months," I said, my voice barely audible. "Marcus, 4 months," I looked up from the contract. "While you were pretending to want a baby with me, you were already carrying his—" The room went dead silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade away. I set the contract back on the desk with deliberate care. I need some air. I walked out of that office, down the hallway, and into the parking lot, where I stood beside my truck and tried to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the key into the ignition. 18 months of trying to conceive. 18 months of hope and disappointment and medical tests and temperature tracking and timed closeness. 18 months of her holding me while I worried that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I couldn't give her the family she wanted. And all along, she'd been planning to have someone else's baby. My phone buzzed, a text from Natasha. "Please come home. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned off my phone, started the truck, and drove in the opposite direction of home. I ended up at the Scripps Pier, where I often came to think through complex research problems. The Pacific stretched endlessly before me, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely lost. The betrayal wasn't just that she was carrying Devin's child. It was the calculated deception, the months of lies, the way she'd let me believe we were building a future together while she was secretly building one with someone else. I'd spent years studying hunter-prey relationships in the ocean's depths. I understood how creatures could camouflage themselves, how they could appear harmless while being anything but. I just never thought I'd married one. My phone had 17 missed calls by the time I turned it back on 3 hours later. 15 from Natasha, 2 from Devin. I listened to none of the voicemails. Instead, I called my brother Jake in San Diego. He was a criminal defense attorney. Not exactly the right specialty for my situation, but he'd know who to call. "Marcus?" He answered on the first ring. "What's wrong? You sound like hell." "I need a lawyer," I said. "The kind who handles divorces." There was a pause. "What happened?" I told him everything. When I finished, Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Jesus, Marcus, that's really fucked up." "Yeah? Listen, I know someone, Diane Kowalski. She's a shark, but she's fair. Want me to call her?" "Not yet," I said. "I need to think this through. Don't wait too long, brother. If she's already 12 weeks along, time isn't on your side." After we hung up, I sat in my truck watching the waves and trying to understand how I'd gotten here. Natasha and I had met at a marine conservation fundraiser 4 years ago. She was there covering the event for the local newspaper's society page, a side gig she did to supplement her court stenography income. I'd been immediately attracted to her sharp wit and easy laugh. She was beautiful, sure. But more than that, she seemed genuine, interested in my work, supportive of my research, content with the quiet life I offered. We'd married after a year-long courtship that felt like something out of a fairy tale. She divorced Devin 2 years before we met. An amicable split, she claimed, necessitated by their different life goals. He wanted children immediately. She wanted to focus on her career. Apparently, that had changed. I finally drove home around midnight. The house was dark except for the porch light Natasha always left on for me. Her car was in the driveway, which meant she was waiting. I sat in the truck for a few more minutes, looking at the place we'd bought together 18 months ago. A modest 3-bedroom Craftsman in Pacific Beach, close enough to the ocean that we could hear the waves on quiet nights. We'd picked it specifically with children in mind. Good schools nearby, a big backyard, an extra bedroom that would make a perfect nursery. The irony wasn't lost on me. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she looked up hopefully when I walked in. "Marcus," she said, starting to stand. "Don't." I held up a hand. "Just don't." I settled into the armchair across from her, putting physical distance between us. The coffee table with our wedding photo suddenly felt like a chasm. "How long have you been sleeping with him?" I asked. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I'm not sleeping with Devin." "Bees, I'm not." She leaned forward, eyes pleading. "It was artificial insemination, Marcus, at the clinic. We never." You expect me to believe this is purely medical? It is. I studied her face, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize. The way her breathing quickened when she lied. The way she touched her neck when she was uncomfortable. The way she couldn't hold eye contact when she was hiding something. She was doing all three. Show me your phone, I said. What? Your phone. Show me your text messages with Devin. Her face went pale. Marcus, that's not... Show me your fucking phone, Natasha. She clutched her cell phone tighter against her chest. I don't have to prove anything to you. Actually, you do. I leaned back in my chair, my voice taking on the clinical tone I used when presenting research findings. You've been lying to me for months. You're carrying another man's child. And you want me to just trust that it's all innocent? You're being paranoid. Am I? I pulled out my own phone and opened the calculator app. Let's do some math. You're 12 weeks pregnant. That puts conception around the first week of February. I was in Monterey Bay from January 30th to February 28th. So, either this baby was conceived through immaculate conception, or you found time to visit the clinic while I was gone. I looked up at her. How many times, Natasha? What do you mean? How many times did you go to the clinic? How many attempts did it take? She shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I don't remember exactly. Bees. You remember everything. It's your job to remember details verbatim. So how many times? Her silence stretched between us like a gulf. It took 5 attempts, she finally whispered. 5 attempts. 5 separate occasions when she'd gone to that clinic, probably with Devin, to try to conceive his child. While married to me. While pretending to try to get pregnant with my baby. Did he go with you? I asked. Another long pause. Sometimes. How many times is sometimes? Marcus, please. How many fucking times did my wife go to a fertility clinic with her ex-husband while I was working to support us? She started crying again, harder this time. All of them, she sobbed. Devin was there for all of them. I felt something snap inside my chest. Not just my heart breaking, something deeper. Something fundamental about who I thought I was, who I thought she was, who I thought we were together. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. I'm going to pack some things. Where are you going? I don't know yet. Marcus, wait. She jumped up from the couch, the blanket falling to the floor. We can work through this. I paused at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to look at her. Really look at her. 3 years of marriage, and I felt like I was seeing her clearly for the first time. Work through what exactly? I asked. The fact that you're pregnant with your ex-husband's baby? The fact that you've been lying to me for months? The fact that you let me think I might be infertile while you were secretly carrying someone else's child? It doesn't have to change anything between us. It changes everything. I gripped the banister. You made a choice, Natasha. You chose him. You chose his money. You chose his baby. I chose to help someone I care about. Someone you care about more than me. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words never came. And in that silence, I found my answer. I went upstairs and packed a suitcase with enough clothes for a week. I took my laptop, my research notes, and the framed photo of my parents from my nightstand. Everything else, the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared, the future we'd planned, I left behind. When I came back downstairs, she was sitting on the bottom step, blocking my path. Please don't go, she said. Not tonight. Move, Natasha. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. I set my suitcase down and looked at her directly. You're having another man's baby. In 6 months, you're going to give birth to Devin Torino's child. There's no coming back from that. It's just surrogacy. Stop calling it that. The words exploded out of me and she flinched backward. This isn't some altruistic gesture. This is you choosing your ex-husband over your current husband. This is you lying to my face for months while you carried his child. I picked up my suitcase again. This is you destroying our marriage for $150,000. Her face crumpled. It wasn't about the money. Then what was it about? She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment I thought she might tell me the truth. The real truth, not the sanitized version she'd been feeding me. Instead, she whispered, I don't know. I stepped around her and walked to the front door. My hand was on the knob when she called my name one more time. Marcus? I didn't turn around. I do love you, she said. I know you don't believe me, but I do. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. No, Natasha, I said without looking back. You love what I represent. Security, stability, a good guy who pays the bills and doesn't ask too many questions. I paused, my suitcase heavy in my hand. But you're in love with him. You always have been. I drove to a motel near the research station and checked in for the night. The room smelled like disinfectant and old cigarettes, but it was clean and quiet. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. My marriage was over. That much was clear. But as I thought about everything Natasha had said, and more importantly, everything she hadn't said, I began to see the outlines of something larger. This wasn't just an affair disguised as surrogacy. This was a con job. A long-term deception designed to extract money from Devin while keeping me as a backup plan. I thought about the $150,000 payment, about the timing of the contract, about the way Devin had looked at Natasha in that clinic, not like a grateful friend, but like a man who thought he owned something. And I thought about the expression on Natasha's face when she'd realized I knew the truth. It wasn't just guilt or shame, it was fear. Fear that I'd figured out more than she wanted me to know. I opened my laptop and began to research. If there's one thing my job had taught me, it's that the truth always leaves a trail. You just have to know where to look. Devin Torino was easy to find online. At 38, he was a successful real estate developer with political ambitions. He'd served 2 terms on the city council and was rumored to be considering a run for mayor. He was married to Rebecca Torino, a former model who now ran a high-end boutique in La Jolla. What was interesting was their financial situation. Despite Devin's apparent success, there were signs of strain. A lawsuit from investors in a failed condo development, a lien on one of his properties, credit reports that suggested someone living beyond their means. $150,000 was a lot of money for surrogacy, even in Southern California. It was the kind of money that might be paid to ensure silence about something more than just artificial insemination. I dug deeper, using research databases I had access to through the university. What I found made my blood run cold. Devin and Rebecca hadn't just been trying to have a baby for years. They'd been married for only 8 months. His divorce from Natasha had been finalized just 10 months ago, not the 2 years she'd told me. Which meant Natasha had been married to Devin when we started dating. I sat back in the uncomfortable motel chair and stared at the screen. Everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our relationship, about how we'd met, all of it had been a lie. But why? What was the end game? I pulled up our marriage certificate online. We'd been married in a small ceremony at the courthouse with just a few friends present. I'd thought she wanted to keep it simple because she was still recovering from her difficult divorce. Now I wondered if the real reason was that she wanted to keep it quiet. My phone rang, startling me out of my research. It was Jake. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm in a motel room doing internet research on my wife's ex-husband," I said. "So not great. Find anything interesting?" I told him what I'd discovered about the timeline of Devin's marriages. Jake whistled low. "That's bigamy if she was still married to him when she married you," he said. "I don't think it's that simple." I rubbed my eyes. "I think this is something else entirely." "Like what?" I stared at the information on my laptop screen. Birth records, marriage certificates, property deeds. Slowly, a pattern was beginning to emerge. "I think my wife never actually divorced her first husband," I said. "I think our entire marriage is a sham." The next morning, I drove to the San Diego County Recorder's office and pulled the official records. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. Devin Torino and Natasha Kellerman had never been divorced. Their marriage certificate was dated 6 years ago. There was no record of divorce proceedings, no decree, no legal separation. Which meant that when Natasha married me 3 years ago, she was committing bigamy. Our marriage wasn't just over, it had never been legal in the first place. I sat in my truck in the courthouse parking lot, staring at the photocopied documents in my hands. 6 years of deception, 6 years of Natasha living a double life, married to 2 men simultaneously. But why? What could possibly be worth this level of complexity and risk? My phone buzzed with a text from Natasha. "Please call me. We need to talk." For the first time since leaving the clinic yesterday, I called her back. "Marcus." She sounded relieved. Thank God. Where are you? Downtown, I said. At the courthouse. There was a sharp intake of breath. What are you doing there? Research. I kept my voice level. Tell me about your divorce from Devin. Marcus, I don't understand. It's a simple question, Natasha. Tell me about your divorce. A long pause. Why are you asking me this? Because I'm looking at the public records, and there's no record of you ever getting divorced. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to respond. That's impossible, she finally said. We got divorced 4 years ago. No, you didn't. Marcus, you're scaring me. What are you saying? I looked down at the marriage certificate in my hands. I'm saying that you're still married to Devin Torino, which means you were never legally married to me. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. How did you find out? And there it was. Not denial, not confusion, not outrage at my accusation. Admission. Jesus Christ, Natasha. I felt like I might throw up. How long were you planning to keep this up? Marcus, please come home. Let me explain. Explain what? How you committed bigamy? How you made me an accessory to fraud? How our entire marriage is a fucking lie? It's not what you think. Then what is it? I was shouting now, drawing stares from other people in the parking lot. What possible explanation could there be for this? I was trying to protect you. The absurdity of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Protect me from what? From Devin, she said. You don't understand what he's like. What he's capable of. So you stayed married to him while marrying me? I couldn't divorce him. Her voice was rising now, taking on a hysterical edge. He wouldn't let me. I felt the world tilt sideways. What do you mean he wouldn't let you? He said if I tried to leave him, he'd destroy me. He'd destroy anyone I cared about. So when I met you, I thought I could have both. I could stay legally married to him to keep him happy, but build a real life with you. And the baby? She started crying again. He found out about us, about our marriage. He said if I didn't give him a child, he'd turn you in for bigamy. He'd ruin your career, your reputation, everything. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she was telling me. If it was true, and that was a big if, then this wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just surrogacy. It was extortion. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because I was terrified, she sobbed. I was terrified you'd leave me. I was terrified Devin would hurt you. I was terrified of everything falling apart. So instead, you decided to have his baby. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Natasha. I hung up the phone and sat in my truck, trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. If Natasha was telling the truth, then she was as much a sufferer as I was. Devin was using the threat of legal action to force her into surrogacy while keeping both of us under his control. But if she was lying, if this was all an elaborate cover story, then she was even more dangerous than I'd thought. Either way, I was in serious legal jeopardy. Bigamy was a felony in California. Even if I'd been an unwitting participant, I could still face criminal charges. I needed help, real help, from someone who understood the legal complexities of what I was dealing with. I called Jake back and told him everything I'd discovered. He listened in silence until I finished. Holy crap, Marcus, he said. This is way bigger than a divorce case. I know. You need to come see me, now. And bring those records with you. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Jake's downtown law office laying out photocopied documents on his conference table like pieces of a puzzle. He studied them carefully, occasionally asking questions or making notes. Okay, he said finally. Let's assume for a moment that your wife is telling the truth about being coerced. That still doesn't explain why she went through with a bigamous marriage to you. She said she was trying to build a real life, but she had to know it would eventually come to light. I thought about that. Maybe she thought Devin would eventually let her go, or maybe she was planning to divorce me before anyone found out. Jake shook his head. This is incredibly elaborate for someone who was supposedly being coerced. There are easier ways to handle domestic misuse, such as restraining orders, divorce proceedings with protection, moving out of state. He gestured at the documents. This level of deception suggests planning, intent. Someone who was building toward a specific goal. What kind of goal? Before Jake could answer, his secretary knocked on the door. Mr. Kellerman? There's a Devin Torino here to see you. He says it's urgent. Jake and I exchanged glances. Send him in, Jake said. Devin entered the conference room like he owned it, his expensive suit immaculate, his smile carnivory. He looked at the documents spread across the table, and his smile widened. Doing a little research, Marcus? He asked. I didn't respond. He settled into a chair across from us with the casual confidence of someone used to controlling every situation. I suppose Natasha told you her version of events. And what would your version be? Jake asked. Devin's eyes flicked to my brother. You must be the attorney. Jake Kellerman, right? I've heard good things about your work. Answer the question. Devin leaned back in his chair. The truth is much simpler than whatever sob story my wife fed you. Natasha and I have an arrangement. We stay legally married for certain financial and tax advantages, but we're free to pursue other relationships. Including her marrying my client? That was her choice. Devin shrugged. I told her it was risky, but she was convinced she could make it work. I found my voice. And the surrogacy? A business transaction. His tone was matter-of-fact. Natasha wanted money to help support her lifestyle with you. Rebecca and I wanted a child. Everyone gets what they want. Except me. Devin turned his cold gaze on me. You got 3 years with a woman who was way out of your league. I'd call that a fair trade. Jake leaned forward. Are you here to negotiate, Mr. Torino? In a way. Devin reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. I'm here to offer Marcus a way out of this mess. He slid the envelope across the table. Inside were legal documents, a divorce decree between him and Natasha, post-dated to make it look like it had been filed years ago. Sign this, Devin said, and I'll make sure it gets filed retroactively. Your marriage to Natasha becomes legal, you divorce her quietly, and everyone walks away clean. Jake examined the documents. This is fraud. This is problem-solving, Devin corrected. The alternative is much less pleasant for everyone involved. Is that a threat? Devin's smile never wavered. It's a reality check. Marcus committed bigamy. That's a felony. I could have him arrested this afternoon. You were a party to the bigamy, Jake pointed out. But I wasn't the one who initiated it. Devin stood up. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it. After that, I'll be forced to contact the district attorney. He paused at the door. Oh, and Marcus, I'd stay away from Natasha if I were you. She's under a lot of stress, and stress isn't good for the baby. After he left, Jake and I sat in silence for several minutes. What do you think? I finally asked. I think you're fucked either way, Jake said bluntly. If you sign those documents, you're committing fraud. If you don't, you're facing felony bigamy charges. What would you do? Jake gathered up the papers Devin had left behind. I'd find another option, such as I'd turn the tables on both of them. That afternoon, I drove back to the house to collect more of my belongings. I expected to find Natasha there, but the place was empty. Her car was gone, and there was a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to doctor's appointment. Please don't leave again. We need to figure this out together. I ignored the note and went upstairs to pack more clothes. While I was in the bedroom, I noticed that Natasha's jewelry box was open on the dresser. Several expensive pieces were missing, pieces I'd given her for birthdays and anniversaries. Interesting. If she was planning to disappear, she was taking the valuable stuff with her. I checked our joint bank accounts online. She'd withdrawn $15,000 in cash over the past week. Our savings account, which had contained nearly $40,000, was down to less than $5,000. She was liquidating assets and hiding money, which meant she was either planning to run or planning to make sure I couldn't access our joint funds in a divorce. Either way, it suggested that her tearful confession about being coerced was BS. I went through her things more systematically. In her closet, I found a shoebox hidden behind winter coats that contained burner phones, prepaid credit cards, and several fake IDs, all with Natasha's photo but different names. This wasn't a woman being coerced by an abusive ex-husband. This was a professional con artist. I photographed everything and sent copies to Jake. Then I sat down at Natasha's computer and began to dig deeper. What I found made my blood run cold. Email accounts I'd never known about, containing correspondence with lawyers, private investigators, and financial advisors, plans to transfer money to offshore accounts, research on countries without extradition treaties. And most damning of all, A detailed timeline of our relationship, complete with notes about my income, my assets, and my vulnerabilities. I'd been marked as a target from the day we met. There was more, much more. Evidence of other men she'd been involved with, other marriages, other cons. Devin wasn't her first husband, he was her third. And I wasn't her second, I was her fifth. Natasha Kellerman was a serial bigamist. I was still reading through her files when I heard a car in the driveway. I quickly closed the laptop and went to the window. Natasha was getting out of her car, along with Devin and another man I didn't recognize. The third man was huge, easily 6'4", with the build of someone who'd spent serious time in the gym. He moved with the controlled grace of a professional fighter or bodyguard. They were coming to the front door. I had about 30 seconds to decide what to do. I could try to sneak out the back, but they'd probably see me. Or I could stay and confront them. But the presence of the muscle suggested this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. I chose a third option. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Marcus Kellerman, I said quietly. I'm at 1247 Seawall Drive in Pacific Beach. There's a man with a tool trying to break into my house. Are you safe, sir? For now. I'm locked in an upstairs bedroom. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line. I heard the front door open downstairs. They had a key. Of course they did. It was Natasha's house, too. I heard voices, but couldn't make out what they were saying. Then footsteps on the stairs. Marcus! Natasha called. I know you're here. Your truck is in the driveway. I didn't respond. Marcus, we need to talk. This time it was Devin. Come down here like a man. Still nothing from me. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and started down the hallway toward the bedroom. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The doorknob turned slowly. That's when I heard the sirens. Crap, Devin's voice sharp with panic. You called the cops? I told you this was a bad idea, Natasha said. Shut up and think. What do we tell them? We tell them we came to get some of my things, and Marcus got paranoid. The sirens were getting closer. I heard rapid footsteps as they hurried back downstairs. Mr. Kellerman, the 911 operator, was still on the line. Officers are arriving now. I went to the bedroom window and looked out. 2 patrol cars were pulling up, officers getting out with their hands on their weapons. I went downstairs to find Natasha, Devin, and the muscle guy standing in my living room with their hands visible, trying to look innocent. It might have worked if I hadn't found all of Natasha's hidden materials. Officers, Devin said smoothly as the cops entered. Thank goodness you're here. We came to check on Marcus. He's been acting erratically since finding out about his wife's pregnancy. That's not what happened, I said, coming down the stairs. I called because these people broke into my house. We didn't break in, Natasha protested. I live here. I have a key. The lead officer, a veteran cop with gray hair and tired eyes, looked between us. Sir, can you explain why you reported an armed intruder? I gestured toward the big man standing next to Devin. I don't know who he is, but he came into my house uninvited. I felt threatened. This is Rick Santos, Devin said. He's my business partner. He came along for moral support. Santos nodded politely at the officers, but said nothing. Up close, I could see the bulge of a shoulder holster under his jacket. He's armed, I told the cops. I have a concealed carry permit, Santos said, producing a card from his wallet. The officers checked his permit and weapon, which was properly licensed. They were starting to look annoyed with me. Mr. Kellerman, the lead officer said, is there an actual crime being committed here? This was my moment. I could let them all walk away, or I could blow everything wide open. Yes, I said. I have evidence that my wife committed bigamy when she married me. The mood in the room shifted instantly. Natasha went pale. Devin's smooth composure cracked slightly. Even Santos looked surprised. That's a serious accusation, the officer said. I have documentation. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd taken of the marriage certificates. She was already married to Devin Torino when she married me 3 years ago. The officers examined the photos, then turned to Natasha. Ma'am, is this accurate? Natasha looked at Devin, panic in her eyes. He gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. No, she said. Marcus is confused. We got divorced before I married him. Then you won't mind if we verify that with the county records? The officer asked. Devin stepped forward. Officers, this is clearly a domestic dispute. My ex-wife and her current husband are having marital problems, and he's trying to drag me into it. Ex-wife? I said. You just admitted she's your ex-wife. But according to public records, you two are still married. The older officer was starting to put the pieces together. Sir, do you have those records with you? In my truck, I said. Go get them. I retrieved the photocopied documents from my truck and handed them to the officers. They studied them carefully, comparing the dates and signatures. Ma'am, the lead officer said to Natasha, these documents suggest you married Mr. Kellerman while still legally married to Mr. Torino. That's bigamy, which is a felony. This is ridiculous, Devin said. She got divorced. There must be some clerical error. Then you won't mind coming down to the station to clear this up, the officer said. That's when Santos made his move. I saw him shift his weight, his hand moving toward his jacket. I shouted a warning just as he drew his tool. Nobody fucking move, Santos barked. The officers spun toward him, their own weapons coming out. Suddenly, my living room was full of people pointing tools at each other. Drop your weapon, the lead officer shouted. Rick, what the hell are you doing? Devin yelled. What you should have done weeks ago, Santos snarled. Cleaning up this mess. And that's when I realized that Santos wasn't working for Devin. He was working against him. Everyone stay calm, Santos said, his tool moving between the officers and Devin. I'm a federal agent. He reached slowly into his jacket with his free hand and produced a badge. Rick Santos, FBI Financial Crimes Division. The officers lowered their weapons slightly, but kept them ready. We've been investigating Devin Torino for money laundering and fraud, Santos continued. This bigamy situation is just the tip of the iceberg. Devin's face had gone completely white. You son of a witch. Mr. Torino, Santos said. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and intimidation of witnesses. What witnesses? Devin demanded. Santos looked at me. Mr. Kellerman has been working with us for the past week. That was news to me, but I played along. That's right. Natasha stared at me in shock. Marcus, what did you do? What I should have done from the beginning, I said. I investigated. The truth was more complicated than that, but as the officers cuffed Devin and began reading him his rights, I realized that sometimes the best revenge is letting your enemies destroy themselves. Santos holstered his weapon and walked over to me. Nice work, he said quietly. We've been trying to get close to Torino for months. How did you know to be here? We've been monitoring his communications. When he planned this little visit, we figured it was time to make our move. I watched as they led Devin to one of the patrol cars. He turned back to look at me, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Kellerman, he called out. Yeah, it is, I replied. Natasha was still standing in the living room, looking lost and confused. One of the officers approached her with handcuffs. Natasha Kellerman, you're under arrest for bigamy and conspiracy to commit fraud. Wait, she said, turning to me with tears in her eyes. Marcus, please, tell them I was coerced. Tell them Devin forced me to do this. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the woman I'd fallen in love with, but a stranger who'd been playing a role for 3 years. I'm sorry, Natasha, I said, but I found your other identities. Your other marriages, your offshore accounts. You weren't coerced. You were running a con. Her face crumpled as the reality of her situation hit her. The baby will be fine, Santos said. Assuming it's actually Torino's and not another part of your scam? As they led her away, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The woman I'd married was gone, had never really existed in the first place. But the man I'd become in the process of uncovering her deception was someone I wasn't sure I liked. After everyone left, I sat alone in the house that had never really been my home, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had never really been mine. My phone rang. It was Jake. I saw the news, he said. FBI arrested Devin Torino for fraud. You want to tell me what the hell is going on? It's a long story, I said. I've got time. I told him everything, the real everything, not the sanitized version I'd given the FBI. When I finished, Jake was quiet for a long moment. Jesus, Marcus. You realize you could have been killed, but I wasn't. And you realize you're still technically married to a bigamist? That's tomorrow's problem. What about the baby? That was the question I'd been dreading. In about 5 months, Natasha would give birth to a child that might be Devin's, might be mine, or might belong to some other man entirely. I don't know, I said honestly. DNA tests, I guess. And if it's yours, I looked around the empty house, at the wedding photos that now seemed like evidence of a crime, at the future that had been built on lies. Then I'll figure out how to be a father to a child whose mother is in federal prison. 3 weeks later, I was back at work, trying to lose myself in research data and water samples. It wasn't working. Every time I tried to focus on migration patterns or temperature variations, my mind would drift back to Natasha, to Devin, to the elaborate con that had consumed 3 years of my life. The legal situation was still unresolved. Natasha and Devin were both in custody, but their cases were complicated by jurisdictional issues and the web of crimes they'd committed across multiple states. My own status was unclear. Technically, I was still married to Natasha, but since our marriage was invalid due to her existing marriage to Devin, I was in legal limbo. Jake was working to get the whole mess sorted out, but he warned me it could take months. The media attention had been intense but brief. Marine biologist uncovers marriage fraud was an interesting story for about a week, until the next scandal came along. I'd turned down all interview requests and tried to keep my head down. I was analyzing plankton samples when my lab phone rang. Dr. Kellerman, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the San Diego Police Department. I need to speak with you about Natasha Kellerman. My blood ran cold. What about her? She's been found dead in her cell. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the phone tighter. What happened? Apparent self-destruction. She left a note. I sat down heavily in my chair. Despite everything she'd done to me, despite the lies and betrayal and fraud, Natasha had been my wife for 3 years. The mother of a child who might be mine. Dr. Kellerman, are you there? Yeah, I managed. I'm here. The note was addressed to you. Can you come down to the station? An hour later, I was sitting in a sterile interview room staring at a handwritten letter in Natasha's familiar script. Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know you'll think this is just one more manipulation, one more lie, but it's not. It's the only honest thing I've done in years. You were right about everything. I am a con artist. I have been married to 5 different men under 4 different names. I've stolen money, identities, and lives. I've left destruction everywhere I've gone. But you were wrong about one thing. I did love you. Maybe not at first. You were supposed to be just another mark, another source of income and stability while I worked Devin's angle. But somewhere along the way, it became real. That's why I couldn't tell you the truth when everything started falling apart. I was terrified that if you knew who I really was, you'd hate me. Turns out I was right. The baby is yours. I know you'll want a DNA test, but I'm telling you now, it's yours. I was never intimate with Devin during our fake marriage. The surrogacy was artificial insemination, but the timing was off. We conceived the night before you left for Monterey, and I used the surrogacy story to hide the pregnancy from you until I could figure out how to make everything work. I know that doesn't make it better. I know nothing I say can make up for what I've done to you. But I wanted you to know that in the end, the only real thing in my life was my love for you and our child. Please don't let my mistakes destroy your chance at happiness. You deserved better than me. You deserve better than this. Take care of our baby. Natasha. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down. Detective Chen watched me carefully. Are you all right, Doctor? Kellerman? She says the baby is mine. Will you want a paternity test? I thought about that. In about 4 months, a child would be born in the prison medical facility. A child whose mother was dead and whose father might be a marine biologist who'd never wanted to be a single parent. Yes, I said. I'll want a paternity test. But even as I said it, I realized it didn't matter what the test showed. Whether the baby was biologically mine or not, I was the only parent it was going to have. 6 months later, I was sitting in a hospital room, holding my daughter for the first time. The DNA test had confirmed what Natasha claimed in her letter. Emma Rose Kellerman was mine. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, bright blue eyes that looked so much like Natasha's it took my breath away. The nurses had told me she was healthy, that the stress of Natasha's situation hadn't affected her development. Looking down at my daughter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The legal situation was finally resolved. Natasha's passing had simplified things considerably. Our marriage was declared invalid due to bigamy. But since she was deceased, there was no one to prosecute. Devin was facing federal charges that would likely put him away for decades. The various fraud cases were working their way through the courts, but that was no longer my concern. I'd sold the house in Pacific Beach, too many bad memories, and bought a smaller place near the university. Close enough to my work that I could walk to the lab, with a good daycare nearby for when Emma was older. Jake had helped me navigate the adoption process to ensure Emma's legal status was secure. As far as the law was concerned, I was her sole parent and guardian. "She's beautiful," said the nurse who'd been helping me with feeding techniques. "Does she look like her mother?" I studied Emma's face, seeing traces of Natasha in her features. "A little," I said. "But I think she's going to be her own person." And she was. Over the next year, as Emma grew from a newborn into a laughing, curious baby, I watched her develop her own personality. She had Natasha's eyes, but my stubborn streak. She was fearless in the way that only babies can be, reaching for everything, exploring every corner of her world. Being a single father wasn't easy. There were nights when she wouldn't stop crying, days when I couldn't figure out what she needed, moments when I felt completely overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising another human being, but there were also moments of pure joy. Her first smile, directed at me while I was changing her diaper. Her first laugh, triggered by a ridiculous face I made while feeding her. The way she'd reach for me when she was tired, trusting me completely to keep her safe. I thought about Natasha sometimes, especially when Emma did something that reminded me of her mother. I wondered what our life might have been like if Natasha had been honest from the beginning. If she'd trusted me enough to tell me the truth about her past, her fears, her mistakes. But those were pointless thoughts. The woman I'd fallen in love with had never really existed. She was a character Natasha had created, a role she'd played to perfection. The real Natasha, the con artist, the serial bigamist, the woman who'd lived multiple lives under multiple names, was someone I'd never really known. Emma was all that mattered now. She was the one good thing that had come out of the wreckage of my marriage, the one part of Natasha that had been real and honest and pure. On Emma's first birthday, I threw a small party at our new house. Jake and his family came, along with a few colleagues from work and some of the neighbors I'd gotten to know. As I watched Emma smearing cake all over her high chair, giggling at the attention, I realized that I'd finally found peace. The revenge I'd sought against Natasha and Devin had been swift and decisive. They'd both paid the ultimate price for their deceptions, he with his freedom, she with her life. But the real victory wasn't their destruction. It was this: a little girl who would grow up knowing she was loved, who would never have to wonder if her father was lying to her, who would build her life on a foundation of truth instead of deception. As the party wound down and the guests headed home, I sat on the floor with Emma, helping her play with her new toys. She looked up at me with those bright blue eyes and babbled something that sounded almost like Daddy. "That's right, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Daddy's here. Daddy's always going to be here." Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, just as it had on the day my world fell apart. But now, holding my daughter in our new home, surrounded by the honest life we were building together, the future didn't seem endless and empty. It seemed full of possibilities. 2 years after Natasha's end, I got a call that changed everything again. "Dr. Kellerman? This is Agent Santos. We need to talk." I hadn't heard from the FBI agent since the day of Devin's arrest. As far as I knew, the case was closed. Devin was serving 15 years in federal prison, and all the other loose ends had been tied up. "What about?" I asked. "Natasha, we've discovered some things about her that you need to know. We met at a coffee shop near the university." Santos looked older, more worn down than I remembered. He slid a thick folder across the table. "We've been investigating the full extent of Natasha's activities," he said. "What we found is extensive." I opened the folder and immediately wished I hadn't. Photos, documents, police reports from half a dozen states. Natasha's face stared back at me from multiple fake IDs, each with a different name. "How many?" I asked. "Identities?" "At least 12 that we've found. Marriages?" 7 confirmed, possibly more." I felt sick. "What happened to the other husbands?" Santos's expression was grim. 2 are dead, apparent self-destructions, but we're reopening those cases. 3 others lost their life savings and had their identities stolen. 1 is still missing. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile them with the woman I'd known. What are you saying? I'm saying your wife wasn't just a con artist, Doctor. Kellerman, she was a serial hunter, and we think she may have been responsible for at least 2 passings. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying she homicided people? We're saying she drove people to self-destruction after destroying their lives, which legally might not be homicide, but morally, he shrugged. I thought about the letter she'd left for me, her claims that she'd loved me, that Emma was my daughter. What about the baby? Santos pulled out another document. We found evidence that she was pregnant at least 3 other times during previous marriages. Each time, she used the pregnancy to extract money and sympathy from her sufferers before disappearing. But Emma is mine. The DNA test confirmed that you're the father. But we found evidence that Natasha had been tracking your schedule, your research trips, everything. She got pregnant deliberately, during a very specific window when she knew you'd be the only possible father. I felt the world spinning around me. Why? Because she was planning to use the baby as leverage, either to keep you in line or to extract child support if she decided to disappear. The surrogacy story was just a cover in case she needed to explain the pregnancy before she was ready. Santos leaned forward. Doctor. Kellerman, your wife was a sociopath. She didn't love you or anyone else. She was incapable of love. Everything she did was calculated to serve her own interests. I looked down at the photos again, seeing Natasha's face repeated with different names, different identities, different sufferers. How many lives had she destroyed? How many people had trusted her the way I had? What do you need from me? I asked. Your testimony when we bring charges in the other cases, and... He hesitated. We need to know if she ever gave you access to offshore accounts, safety deposit boxes, anything like that. No, I told you everything I found. Because we think there's more money out there, a lot more. And legally, if she never divorced any of her previous husbands, then her assets might belong to them. What about Emma? Santos's expression softened slightly. The child is innocent in all this. Whatever happens with the estate, that's not going to affect your custody. After he left, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the folder full of evidence. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend I'd never seen it. Emma was almost 3 now, a happy, healthy toddler who called me daddy and had never known any other parent. But the other part of me, the scientist who'd spent his career uncovering truth, knew I had to see this through. I opened the folder again and began to read. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Natasha hadn't just been running financial cons. She'd been systematically destroying lives, taking everything from her sufferers before moving on to the next target. There was Michael Chen, a software engineer in Portland who'd lost his house, his savings, and his will to live after Natasha disappeared with their joint bank accounts. He'd killed himself 2 weeks after discovering she was already married to someone else. There was David Rodriguez, a teacher in Phoenix who'd mortgaged his house to pay for Natasha's medical treatments for a cancer she didn't have. He'd lost everything and was now living in his car. There was James Patterson, a widower in Denver who'd been married to Natasha for 6 months before she vanished with his dead wife's jewelry and life insurance money. He'd been found dead in his garage, carbon monoxide poisoning, with a note apologizing for being too stupid to live. The pattern was always the same. Natasha would target successful, lonely men, usually recently divorced or widowed. She'd present herself as the perfect partner, understanding and supportive and madly in love. She'd marry them quickly, gain access to their finances, and then create a crisis that required their money to solve. Sometimes she'd disappear suddenly. Sometimes she'd stage a gradual decline in the relationship, making her sufferers feel like they were the problem. And sometimes, when the men got too close to figuring out her game, they'd end up dead. I thought about my own experience with her. The way she'd isolated me from friends and family, the way she'd made me doubt myself when I'd started asking questions, the way she'd seemed to know exactly what to say to keep me off balance. If I hadn't been as persistent in my investigation, if I hadn't found the evidence when I did, would I have ended up like Michael Chen or James Patterson? That night, I stood in Emma's doorway watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. She had no idea that her mother had been a monster, that she'd been conceived as part of an elaborate scheme to control and manipulate. Should I tell her when she was older? Should I let her grow up thinking Natasha had been a good person who'd made some mistakes? Or should I tell her the truth, that her mother had been a serial hunter who destroyed lives and driven people to self-destruction? I didn't have answers to those questions, but I knew one thing for certain. Emma would never become what her mother had been. I'd make sure of that. The trials began 6 months later. I testified in 3 different states, telling the same story over and over again. How I'd met Natasha, how she'd deceived me, how I'd uncovered her crimes. The prosecutors painted a picture of a woman who'd been running cons for over a decade, who'd assumed multiple identities and destroyed multiple lives. The defense attorneys tried to portray her as a sufferer herself, someone who'd been misused and traumatized into a life of crime. I didn't buy it. I'd seen the evidence, read the files, talked to the other sufferers. Natasha had been a hunter, pure and simple. The only sufferer in her story was Emma, who'd have to grow up without a mother because of the choices Natasha had made. Devin Torino was also called to testify. He'd been moved from federal prison to the county jail for the trial, and seeing him again brought back all the anger I'd felt during those first days after discovering the truth. But he looked different now, smaller, older. Prison had not been kind to him. His testimony revealed the extent of Natasha's manipulation. She'd convinced him that their fake marriage was necessary for tax purposes, that the bigamy charges would never stick because there was no paper trail. She'd promised him a child in exchange for his silence and protection. She played me just like she played everyone else, he admitted from the witness stand. I thought I was using her, but she was using me. Did you know about her other marriages? The prosecutor asked. Not at first, but eventually, yeah. She told me it was all business, that she was building a retirement fund for us. Did that concern you? Devin looked directly at me. I figured if I could get what I wanted out of the arrangement, it wasn't my problem what happened to the other guys. That was Devin in a nutshell. He'd known Natasha was destroying lives, and he hadn't cared as long as he got what he wanted. The trial lasted 3 weeks. In the end, Devin was convicted of conspiracy and fraud, adding another 10 years to his federal sentence. The other defendants, several of Natasha's accomplices who'd helped her create fake identities and move money, received lesser sentences. But the real justice had already been served. Natasha was dead, her sufferers were finally getting some closure, and the money she'd stolen was being returned to the people she'd hurt. As for me, I was free, free of the lies, free of the deception, free to build a new life with my daughter. Emma was 4 now, starting preschool and asking questions about everything. She wanted to know where her mommy was, why she only had a daddy when other kids had both parents. I told her that her mommy had been sick and couldn't be with us anymore, but that she'd loved Emma very much. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all the truth a 4-year-old could handle. Maybe someday I'd tell her more. Maybe when she was older, when she could understand the complexities of human nature, I'd explain what her mother had really been. But for now, it was enough that she knew she was loved, that she was safe, that her father would always be there for her. I'd rebuilt my life from the ground up. New house, new routines, new perspectives on trust and love and family. I'd learned that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones we don't know at all. But I'd also learned that from the deepest betrayal can come the greatest gift. Emma was living proof that even the worst situations can produce something beautiful. As I tucked her into bed that night, she looked up at me with those bright blue eyes that still reminded me so much of Natasha. "Daddy," she said, "will you always take care of me?" "Always, sweetheart," I promised. "Always." And unlike her mother, I meant every word.